All right, Miss Melanie. So I'm going to go over some of the work that we're going to do today. I'm going to have the videos separated so you know what we're doing. And I'm also going to read some of the passages to you so you can follow along with us. This is your science work that you are missing for this week with Miss Lear. So it is about weathering. So weathering is like the process where just the weather outside, because of wind and rain and things like that, it breaks down things on Earth. So things like rocks and stuff like that, just being outside, like if you leave a toy outside for an entire year, the rain, the dirt, the mud, the wind, everything will ruin that toy and eventually it won't look the same. So the same thing happens to all things that are on Earth, whether they're rocks or buildings or anything that is exposed to the weather can be weathered. So we call that process weathering, which means that the weather is changing that item or object. All right, so we have a passage here that we're going to read about weathering. Some questions to ask about it that we're going to have to answer, that you're going to go back into there. And then this is about weathering, erosion, and deposition. So those are different kinds of processes that we're going to talk about. But that's a very big fourth grade thing. So I'm going to read these to you. And then when you're finished with this, the weathering, erosion, and deposition, you need to mark on here. You're supposed to sort the things, but really all you have to do is, you don't have to do this. You can do just this side, and you can mark things, as a W for weathering, an E for erosion, and a D if it is deposition. Deposition has the word deposit in it. Deposit means that you leave something behind, like a bank. You deposit your money in the bank. So that means that you're leaving something behind. You're like putting something somewhere. So that's what deposition means. It comes from the word deposit. All right, so let me read some of these passages to you. So here's weathering. Weathering is the process of breaking down rocks into smaller pieces. Weathering happens through wind, rain, ice, and snow. There are two types of weathering, mechanical and chemical. So if you're not already reading this with me, go ahead and get out your paper and start reading it with me. Mechanical weathering, also known as physical weathering, is the breakdown of rocks through conditions in the atmosphere, such as heat and pressure. An example of mechanical weathering is when water gets into the cracks of rocks and freezes. Once the water freezes and turns to ice, it can break the rock into smaller pieces. Another example is rocks under a waterfall. The pressure of the water from the waterfall will change the rocks. Chemical weathering happens when water interacts with the rocks. It causes the chemicals in the rocks to change, which causes the rocks to break down. For example, water can dissolve limestone, which is a form of chemical weathering. Another example is certain rocks getting too much oxygen and becoming weak. Weathering mainly happens on the Earth's surface. However, it can extend deeper if water gets in cracks and goes below the Earth's surface. Weathering can change landforms over time. Weathering leads to erosion, which is the process of transporting rock, soil, or sediment to a different location. So then we had our big ideas here that the whole weathering process is where it's the process of breaking down rocks into smaller pieces, and there's two kinds. So you could have mechanical weathering, which is also known as physical weathering. And that is where something is actually, so like that physical and mechanical means that there is some object or something else that is actually changing it. So this is where like heat and pressure are changing something. So that's when like the water gets into the rock and it freezes, like something is actually getting into that rock and changing it. Chemical weathering, you know what chemicals are. Those are like atoms and small things like that. So that's when a chemical is interacting with the rocks. So it says this when water interacts, it causes the chemicals in the rocks to change, which causes the rocks to break down. So for this one, an example is water can dissolve limestone, which is a form of chemical weathering. So the water is interacting with the chemicals inside the rock, versus here the water is freezing and it's actually going and breaking that rock open. So it's a little bit different. One is like where a chemical process is happening, and the other one is where something is physically happening to the rock instead of just like the little tiny chemicals that are in it. So you're going to answer the questions that are here. What is weathering? You can get the definition right from the text. You should go back, find that. Weathering is the process of breaking down rocks into smaller pieces. What is mechanical weathering? That gives you the definition on the other side, and it gives you an example. Remember, that example is when the water gets into the rock and it freezes it and it breaks that rock open. Chemical weathering, it's the same thing. Go back and reread and get your example of the chemical weathering and what it is. How does weathering happen below the Earth's surface? They talk about that at the end when they talk about mostly it happens on the Earth's surface, but if water gets into cracks and goes below the Earth's surface, weathering can change landforms over time. So they talk about it there, okay? All right, weathering, erosion, and deposition. We will do that one next in the other video. Okay, so go ahead and finish those questions, and then when you're ready, go to weathering, erosion, and deposition and listen to that one.